I'm Ryan. I'm a science teacher.
I'm Cheryl, and I slept through science.
Each episode will tackle a science question you may have learned in school, but can't quite remember or fully explain.
And I'll take the risk of asking the dumb questions so that we can all understand the science we slept through.
The bell has rung. Let's get started. Welcome to lesson 39. We are in our Houseplants unit. Cheryl,
Yes.
could you possibly have another question about your houseplants?
I do. I have a really important one.
Ooh, okay. Lay it on me.
Well, I've been thinking about this because in my more recent adult years, I have learned that I have allergies.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And I know you have you have way more intense allergies than I do. So
Well, allergies
there is
like
empathy there.
seasonal allergies,
Yes.
not like food allergies.
Yes, I have the seasonal
Yeah.
allergies. And what's funny is
Yeah.
actually I think I've had them for years. And my mom
You were just
was
in
a
denial?
nurse, and she would tell me like, "Oh, your ears are itchy or whatever
Uh-huh.
because you probably have seasonal allergies." And I'd like forget she said it or something, like it's what every parent wants to hear as well,
Yeah. Yeah.
And then more recently my husband's been telling me that because he gets like more severe seasonal allergies.
Mhm.
He's like, "Yeah, your throat is dry and you feel
Mhm.
like you have a cold and
Mhm.
your eyes are itchy and all that, like because you have allergies."
Yep.
And that's really weird to realize and then be like, I don't know, like it's helpful in a way to be like, "Oh, there's a reason. Like, why do I feel like this?" And I haven't tied
Yes.
it to every spring, but it's every spring. And so, and you can
Okay.
tell they're way more mild than yours because I didn't even really like realize what they were for years and
Mm.
years and years. Um, but what's weird to me though is that I don't think I'm allergic to my houseplants every spring.
Oh, okay.
I think it's like those outdoor plants and all that pollen that gets on your car and is in the air and the
Mhm.
cottonwood. I don't know all the different things that we get allergic to in the springtime. But I mean, like my houseplants aren't like making my kitchen all dusty with pollen every spring or
That's
anything
true.
like that. And so
Uh-huh.
I don't think I'm allergic to them. And if I were, I probably would get rid of them. I would be sad, but I
Yeah.
don't think I would keep them in my home. But
Yeah.
then what's the deal with that? Like, why is it that my houseplants aren't like pooping pollen all over my home once a year?
Okay. So the question is, why aren't my houseplants pooping pollen all over my home once a year? Did I get
Yep.
that
Yeah,
right?
you got it.
Okay, great. Well, I think where we need to start with the pre-assessment, Cheryl, is what do you know about pollen? What is it, and why do plants have it in the first
Ooh.
place?
Well, I mean, the first thing I think about is bees.
Okay, uh-huh.
Bees, pollinating,
Uh-huh.
and that bees pollinate with the pollen. It gets on
Uh-huh.
their butts or something, and then they put it on another plant. Clearly, we need to talk about pollinating in another episode as far as like what bees are up to. But that's the first thing I think about. So it has to do with, and I don't know then if it has to do with plants reproducing and like growing more plants or just like, so I think pollinating also just is like better for plants. I think it has to do with reproducing in some way or another, which sounds like a very spring thing with new life.
Uh-huh.
And I'm wondering, I don't think it's seeds though. I mean, I know that plants like have their little seeds. Like there's, dandelions that become those puff balls
Uh-huh.
and then those like go on the wind and
Yep.
like then they plant themselves in other
Sure.
places or pine cones or, there's all these different things
Mhm.
that plants have that help them spread.
Uh-huh.
But when there's like pollen that trees just like let into the air and then the wind carries,
Uh-huh.
I don't think that's to plant more trees, but is it something else. I think it's beneficial for the trees.
Okay, when you say beneficial, what do you mean?
Well, I don't know if it's not seeds, so it's not like planting more trees, but is it like doing something else for the health or growth of trees or new trees or I don't know. I think it's good. It's like a good thing that it's spreading around even though my nose doesn't like it.
Okay, so you think it's a positive thing for the plant, unlike
Yes.
what we talked about a couple of lessons ago, leaves turning yellow is a sign of something bad. So this is something you
Yeah.
think that is good. Trees are supposed to do this.
Yeah, and like the wind carries a really key role in it, just like the wind carries a key role in spreading
Okay.
seeds
Okay.
around. I would think that the wind, like spreading the pollen, is a good thing too.
Okay.
But I don't know what it's doing. Or is it just getting rid of it? It's like, listen, I did my thing with the pollen. Now I'm done with it. You like
Mm,
shed it. That's another option is that it
okay.
just like needs to get rid of it. And then we have to deal with it on our cars and in our noses.
Okay. Great. That's a lot of really good information. Next question. You've talked a lot about trees.
Yeah.
Are trees the only plants that have pollen?
No, because flowers have them. That's what
Okay.
bees go in the little center of the flower. And that's
Okay.
where the pollen is.
Okay.
And I'm guessing other outdoor I don't know. Do
Do
bushes have pollen? I don't.
Hmm.
What's really the difference between a tree and a bush anyway? They're like cousins or something.
They're
Um,
related, yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Do any of your houseplants have flowers?
No. No, I'm not really a flower person.
I know.
Yeah. So
But
I just like I had one that was an orchid in the past and then it died and I didn't care because I don't really care about flowers
right. Do
very
you
much.
remember if that orchid had pollen?
Oh. I mean, I would assume that it does, but I don't remember it having it.
Okay.
Although I've been given flowers as a gift. There's this one kind of flower. Is it the orchid? There's one kind of flower I was given as a gift years ago. And then it was on my desk. And then all of a sudden my desk was all orange.
Mm.
Wait, like because it like dropped all of its pollen. And that was
Mhm.
really annoying.
So basically, you don't have any plants that have pollen because if you did have a plant that had pollen, you'd get rid of it. Is that what I'm understanding from you?
That's
Because
really
it'd be
funny.
annoying, so you'd get rid of it. It's kind of a form of artificial selection, if you will. You're
Yeah.
selecting against plants that have pollen,
Yeah. And just who cares about flowers? I mean, people do. I don't.
but you
So
don't.
like,
Yeah.
yeah. That's really funny.
Okay. So with kind of those things together, we talk about pollen. You think it's good for plants. It's something it's probably doing on purpose, but none of your houseplants have them. If it's something that's good for the plant, why don't you think your houseplants have pollen if it's good for them?
Oh, well, I think there's probably different types of plants.
Okay.
And so I think there's a type of plant that produces pollen or needs it. And again, I'm not sure what those bees are doing and what the wind is doing as far as like if it's just like reproduction or just like health.
Mm-hmm.
It's good for them. I know
Okay.
like it's good for the environment and for plants that there is pollen happening
But you
and
don't know why.
pollinating. Um, but if not 100% of plants have pollen, then it means not all plants need pollen. It means that's probably like a sub classification of
Mm,
plants
okay.
that do the pollen thing, but then other plants grow or reproduce or what, like do what they need to do to live their lives
Mm-hmm.
without it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other thoughts about plants and pollen?
That's it.
Okay. We got all sorts of exciting things to talk about to answer your question here, Cheryl.
Oh boy.
And interestingly enough, we're going to talk about the bees, specifically the birds and the bees, if you catch my meaning.
I was about to make that joke.
When you were talking about the bees, I was like, well, that is sort of what we're going to be talking about because pollen is plant sperm.
Okay. Okay, so can I make a guess then?
Yeah.
What I think is happening?
Yes.
I think it's like when fish lay their little eggs and then the boy fish comes along and like puts his sperm on them and it like
Yep.
inseminates, maybe
Mm-hmm.
something like that. So like the trees and everybody
Yep.
like put out their little seeds and then the pollen comes in and like makes it actually grow and make life.
Yes. Then what are the bees doing?
They're helping with that process. They're doing the same thing the wind is doing, just more strategically than the
Yes.
wind because my car is not going to get pregnant. I mean,
It is
nobody's
not.
getting pregnant, but like, you know what I mean?
Yes, I know exactly what you mean. And yes, you're exactly right. The thing to just keep in mind is that the trees don't use bees. And the plants that use the bees aren't using the wind.
Okay.
The different plants have different strategies of getting the pollen, the sperm, to the eggs, because that's sperm and egg, they have to meet, just like you said with the fish. Same thing with plants. For flowering plants, so plants that have flowers, the flowers are the sex organs.
Oh, I think I remember that in school a little bit.
Yeah. So, and it depends, different plants do it differently, but oftentimes you'll have both male and female parts on the same flower, and the pollen will be there. And what happens is the bees will come get nectar, do whatever the stuff is, get some of the pollen, it'll stick to them. They'll go to another plant and some of that pollen will fall off and then fall down into the flower and fall into the part that leads to where the ovaries, where the eggs are, and it'll actually pollinate. And that's what it means to pollinate.
And that's why it's like good for your yard if you have bees around.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because it's going to help those plants continue to reproduce.
Yeah.
But not all plants use a pollinator. Some of them use the wind. And you've mentioned a couple. You mentioned trees with pine cones.
Yeah.
Right. So like pine trees and other evergreen trees use the wind. Also, dandelions.
Yeah.
Right. So they use the wind to spread the seeds.
Yeah.
Right. So that's at a different point in the process as opposed to spreading the pollen. But, so there's all sorts of different strategies that plants use because plants can't move for the most part. So they have to do things differently than animals do in order to be able to swap genetic material to reproduce. So that's what pollen is. So now let's get to the question, if that's the case, why don't any of your houseplants have pollen? And that gets to the question I asked you at the end, do any of them have flowers? See why I was asking that question now?
Yeah.
Right? And so really the question is, why don't your houseplants, the ones that you have flowers, other than the fact that you artificially selected against the ones that do? And the answer is going to depend on the plant. And I did some looking at different types of plants and some of common houseplants and things. And some of them aren't mature enough. Plants, so just like as humans, you have to reach a point where you have what we call sexual maturity, right?
Yeah.
You go through puberty, through all of that to develop to a place where you can actually reproduce. Plants, not all of them, but some of them have a similar thing. Now, they don't really have plant puberty per se, but they have to be old enough before they actually can start to either produce flowers or pollen to reproduce or any of those things. So that's some of it. And sometimes, depending on the plant, it could be 10, 15 years before a plant reaches that point where it can start to flower.
Wait, so if I keep some of my houseplants for years and years, there's a possibility that they're gonna have flowers eventually?
Depending on the plant,
That
yes,
would
it
be
is
really
possible.
fun.
It is possible. But some of the other things are sometimes the conditions necessary for a plant to be able to flower, we don't easily meet in our houses. Remember how we talked
Mm,
about if they get too much water or not enough water or too much sunlight and their leaves turn yellow and it can change those, right? So you have to have the right amount of water. There's a whole lot of those things, a lot of those factors. Even just the humidity makes a difference for
mm,
some of the plants. If they're from a more
interesting.
tropical region, we do not live in a tropical region. Our houses, we don't want to be super humid because that's uncomfortable for us. That doesn't necessarily mean that the plant can't survive. It may survive just fine, but it may not be in the ideal condition where it's going to go ahead and produce flowers,
Interesting.
right? Sometimes it's the amount of sunlight or the intensity of sunlight that it can have. That's why putting plants near a window is often a good idea. Sometimes it's the number of hours of light. Sometimes it has to do with the acidity or the nutrients that are in the soil. Like there's so many different factors that a plant has to have just right to be able to then produce those flowers, because it takes energy to produce
Mm,
all of those flowers and to produce the pollen and to go through that whole process takes energy from the plant. So it has to know that it's healthy enough to expend the energy on those things
mm.
before it's going to do it. And obviously it's not consciously thinking about it. But so does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Which means now it's time for your next houseplant quiz.
Okay.
Great. What is pollen?
Plant sperm.
Bingo. Nice job. Why do plants want to move their pollen around?
To make new plants, to
Mhm.
make plant babies.
To make plant babies.
Yes.
Yes. Which we call,
Plants.
like, what's the thing that leads
Saplings.
that,
An
that
egg. Is it actually an egg though?
Nope. Well, it will be, the pollen meets with the egg, but then when the
Yeah.
pollen and the egg meet, they will form into we didn't talk about this,
Plant.
but you said it at the beginning. Where do plants come from?
Plant mommies and plant daddies.
Seeds?
Seeds. Wait. They make a seed after they do that?
That's what makes a seed. Yeah. The
I
egg
thought
and the
the
sperm
seed
come
was
together.
like
It
when it
makes
went
this.
out first and then the pollen went and like joined it.
No.
Wow.
Seed is formed from the two,
Oh.
the egg and the sperm coming together.
Okay. That was a helpful piece of information then too.
Good. Yeah, I didn't realize that. Yeah, perfect. What are two strategies that plants use to move pollen around?
Bees and wind.
Bingo. Yep. And then obviously they use more than just those two, but those are the two we talked about. So I figured that makes sense. What are some of the conditions necessary for plants to produce flowers?
Being healthy.
Okay. And what are some of the things that they might need, or maybe things that they wouldn't get if they were contained in a house, like a houseplant?
The correct conditions like amount of light and soil composition
Mhm.
and humidity and love.
They need
I
no love because they don't get any love in the wild.
Oh, that's true because I give them love, so
I'll
then
bet you
that maybe
do.
they don't need love.
Yes, great. And one other thing that I didn't mention before, not all plants produce flowers. You probably knew that, but the way that we were talking, I might have implied that that's the case, but not all plants do. There are flowering plants and non-flowering plants.
Mm,
Like evergreen trees don't produce flowers. They're
yeah.
non-flowering plants. But just because we don't see a flower on a plant doesn't mean it's automatically a non-flowering plant.
Mm.
But there are plants that just plain don't produce flowers.
So don't judge.
That's right. Stop your plantism. Okay, I think it's time for us to wrap up this lesson. Why don't you pack up your stuff and get ready for my closing remarks? You can follow us on Instagram and Facebook at I Slept Through Science or on Twitter at Slept Science.
If you have dumb science questions like I do, please send them to us. You can email us at isleptthroughscience@gmail.com, or you can even send us a voice memo and we'll play it on the podcast.
Please rate and review our podcast to tell other people what you think about it, subscribe to make sure you don't miss an episode, and share about our podcast on social media.
Thank you to Beth Reed Miller for the artwork. You can check out more of Beth's artwork at Beth Is Something. Okay, great. Thanks. Bye.
The bell doesn't dismiss you. I dismiss you.